Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits, and today I have an exciting show for you. It's Clayton Roche from UMA Protocol, and also one of the administrators of DeFi Nation, which is a very helpful DeFi community group. So before we get into it, this video is for opinion only and information and entertainment. It's not intended to be investment advice. So, seek a licensed professional for investment advice. Before we start, if you're interested in Bitcoin and blockchain, please consider clicking that subscribe button and also click the bell so you can get notifications about future videos that I might post. Thank you. Okay, without any further ado, Clayton, welcome.
Hey, Miko, thanks for having me on. This is cool.
It's great to have you. So first things first, tell us a bit about what got you interested in blockchain stuff.
Sure. So my story is not terribly illustrious or idealistic. I was watching Bitcoin climb in 2017, and a friend told me he was going to buy some, and I could accept strangers getting rich on Bitcoin, but I just couldn't accept a friend doing it without me along for the ride. So I had to buy a little bit, and then I learned how it worked, and I haven't looked back as far as where my attention goes.
That's fantastic.
It blew my mind.
There's always this kind of dawning moment. I actually had a moment in the Coupa Cafe in Palo Alto where they had a Bitcoin checkout, and it was you can buy Earl Grey tea with Bitcoin. It turns out that if I had bought it, it would be, I think, almost $400 of today's Bitcoin to buy a cup of tea. But it struck me, and it caused me to begin a home mining project, with the goal of buying a cup of tea like that. It was definitely play. It was not I'm going to make money. No, I'm going to get a cup of tea with this magic internet money, and boy, was that a rabbit hole. I just fell and I kept falling. I mean, it was definitely something. So this is great. So what I'd love to kind of get from you is, tell us, what is UMA Protocol, and, we can take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just introduce myself that I'm the head of community development with UMA. And so UMA Protocol it's mostly known as a synthetic assets platform and protocol. So we have expiring synthetic assets that run on the protocol, and they work a bit different than the synthetics with an X system.
Yep.
But there's also this other piece of UMA that is a little bit bigger picture than just synthetics, and it has to do with the data verification mechanism, which is it's called a few different names. One is called a priceless oracle or an optimistic oracle. And the basic idea with it is that there's not an on-chain price feed all the time. The price is only ever pushed on-chain if there's some sort of dispute. And the disputes would happen if someone tries to liquidate a collateralized position without, and they were wrong. So if someone tries to liquidate somebody and in fact the price of that asset wasn't under the collateralization ratio, then there would be a dispute filed, and only then would the price be pushed on chain.
Wow,
so that's
an optimization.
That's just a short overview for you.
Wow, that's really amazing. And how did this kind of get to be? Obviously one of the biggest issues in any kind of synthetic asset platform is the oracles. So, how did this get started?
So, I'm going to be speaking kind of before my time with the team, just kind of with the history with Allison and Hart. So they started working on this problem around synthetic assets first, and then they sort of discovered the oracle problem, kind of like you expressed. And only then did they kind of go about addressing that directly. The inspiration actually started with a paper by Vitalik on the Schelling point problem, and he basically talks about the ability to build something like this. What UMA is doing is actually a bit of an application of Vitalik.
Can we roll back real quick? So I assume you're talking about the game theoretical work of Thomas Schelling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
for the audience, would be great to dip in a little bit there and talk about the Schelling point game,
Yeah.
and because I think it's interesting, and then kind of bring it back to Uma.
Sure. No, that's good. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Check in there. So, and please also jump in and flesh it out for me. So the basic idea with it is that if you have a bunch of people and you're requesting a certain piece of information from them and they're uncoordinated, the most likely response you're going to get from them is the truth. And the reason this is true is because, like, if you're taking the mode, if you're taking like the most common response, the reason this is true is because like it would be difficult to like all coordinate around a wrong response. Like the best kind of
Yeah.
yeah.
It's very hard. One of the things that Balaji was tweeting about on Twitter is talking about the idea that Bitcoin itself is a Schelling point game for financially disenfranchised people, right? And one of the, I just want to share for the audience's sake, kind of one of the canonical examples of a Schelling game, which is the idea that you're meeting someone in New York City tomorrow, and nobody has told you when the meeting is or where the meeting is. And then it's like, and both players have been told this, right? And so the likelihood that they both end up like at noon, there are going to actually be Schelling points throughout the city. Like, for example, the observation deck of the Empire State Building or Grand Central Station, at noon, right? So there are going to be these Schelling points where both players will just be like, I'm going to pick that one because I think the other person is going to pick that place, right? So that's kind of the mood. So I just wanted to relay that.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you for that. So yeah, that's kind of the idea with this. And so the way that it's implemented into like a priceless oracle is that, imagine you had a bunch of people being asked what was the price of Bitcoin at the timestamp of like noon UTC. It would be difficult for them to, in an uncoordinated fashion, to like all give the wrong answer. The most likely answer they're going to give is the right answer. Like this raises an obvious objection, and pause me if you don't want me to launch into this, but
no, please.
It raises the objection that, of course, if they have an incentive to coordinate, they will, right?
Yeah.
So like imagine that someone's asking, well, what was the price of Bitcoin yesterday? And you happen to have a position that was liquidated, or potentially you could liquidate someone's position and take that money. You would say, well, hey guys, just lie for me. Tell everyone the Bitcoin cost $1 yesterday. And then we can take all this money and I'll share it with you. So the way that UMA protocol's system is designed is that the profit from doing so always has to be less than the cost of doing so. It's this economic guarantee built into the system, and it relates to the market cap of the UMA token. And basically, all of the value that the UMA protocol secures has to be less than the market cap of the token, or else it would be potentially profitable to bribe token holders. Essentially,
Can I monkey wrench?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, what if the players are actually playing an external game? Like, what if they're doing something that's not sort of mathematically within the scope of this system?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a criticism that I've brought up a number of times and in different forms. Like, sure. I could imagine a government wanting to do that, or even a competitor wanting to do that, and so they could still take the money. Like, they would still get whatever profit. It would be less than the cost, but they would still get some compensation. But then also the external compensation. I actually don't have like a very solid answer for you about this at this very moment.
It's designed to be super intractable. So
yeah, other than there is a safety level built into this. Like we have it designed in such a way that the profit from corruption actually has to be far less than the cost of corruption, not just like on the margin. But otherwise, it's like still a little bit of a research and process as far as answering that question goes, I think. I would also just defer to like the authority, which is to say, like, I know that Hart or Allison would have a better answer for you on that. Like,
nice.
They've thought in a nuanced way about this, but it's also something that concerns me for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard problem. I mean, we had a the CTO of Casper Labs on, and she was talking about kind of correct by construction, proof of stake and the mathematics of the game theory, and I think that, Satoshi Nakamoto introduced very important game theoretical principles that kind of disfavor lying, and really, if you want to bring hash, the incentive for bringing, I guess, truthful hash is like better than the disincentive for bringing lying hash, right? So I think that
Right.
that sounds familiar. Like it sounds like
Mhm.
similar core principles.
Yeah, yeah. And this is also like somewhat theoretical insofar as like actually coordinating a bribe across all of token holders would be extremely difficult to do, especially before like that news got out that was happening. Um, and it would be very difficult to like buy up enough tokens to be terribly controlling just because of liquidity. Um, so there's other constraints that are non-theoretical that you could sort of throw into it. None of them like land on the level of guarantee to me yet.
Sure.
So I think it's still an ongoing conversation. I think it's not something that's like insurmountable. I think, but yeah,
That's neat.
And
So what are the kind of applications, like what's the current state of the network?
yeah. So maybe I'll just like tell you a little bit about what we've launched in the last several months.
Wonderful. That'd be great.
So like UMA just came onto mainnet. I think it was Q2 this year, and the products that we've launched so far are ETH BTC, which is just an index that tracked the price of ETH to BTC. We've launched YComp, which is it was synthetic comp token, and we launched it during the kind of the peak of the comp price when people were looking for ways to short it. And then most recently is YUSD, which is a yield dollar token. And what's cool about this token is it allows you to basically take out a fixed rate loan or lending on your Ethereum. So you can lock up Ethereum as collateral and mint these YUSD tokens and sell them on the market. And we're doing liquidity mining right now, which kind of changes the formula, but let's just assume I'm talking about the raw product. The idea here would be the market might be trading them for 98 cents and you would sell them for that price. And essentially it's equivalent to like a stability fee on MakerDAO, except when you sell them for 98 cents, you're locking in that funding rate for this leverage. So it's just like it allows for fixed rate funding essentially.
Wow.
So that's something we're doing right now. We are doing liquidity mining on it, and so we've actually attracted about $20 million worth of Ethereum locked as collateral. And what's happened then is people are actually demanding this token so much that it's trading over $1. And what's really cool, Nico, is if you have a bunch of Ethereum, you could either mint this YUSD and earn quite high returns just by selling it and waiting till the end of this month. Or you can actually get paid somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 to 50% APR paid to leverage long on Ethereum. Like think about like MakerDAO right now, I think the stability fee is 0%. But if because of the liquidity mining with UMA right now, you can actually get, it's essentially equivalent to a negative stability fee. So that's kind of fun.
That's amazing.
And I think it's something that like I think there's people out there that would gladly do it if they knew more about it. Like, so that's part of my job, right? Is to like help people understand this opportunity.
Yeah,
exists.
I love that. Tell me kind of like what your kind of favorite end user tool chain is for interacting with the protocol.
So you mean just like what kind of UI?
Yeah, like what would users do? Like, how would a user get the benefits of
Sure.
Providing liquidity?
So we have tools.umaproject.org, and that website is just kind of the UI. There's also another UI that Tom Howard and Nor built. You had Tom on your show recently.
Yep.
Called usynth.xyz. So both of those interfaces would allow you to do these things. If you're eager to leverage long on Ethereum, you're not going to be liquidity mining. You're actually just taking advantage of the economic conditions that liquidity mining has created. So what you're going to do is go to one of those dApps. You're going to lock your ETH as collateral. You're going to mint YUSD, and then you're going to you're either just going to sell it into the pool on Balancer, in which case you get this win, and then by the end of the month you can you'll sort of just repay it at $1. So you'd sell it for $1.03 now and repay it at $1. Or you could sell that YUSD for more ETH, lock that ETH back in, and you can wind it up to a 2x leverage and still maintain a 200% collateralization ratio. If you're comfortable with that. That's not a recommendation, it's just an observation.
It's not investment advice.
Right, exactly, because ETH is volatile. Excuse me. So yeah, there's a few ways you could take it, or you can mint the YUSD and just be a liquidity provider with USDC on the pool and get these liquidity mining rewards.
Yeah. And what are the kind of like you mentioned kind of volatility? You know, like what are the kinds of scenarios in which someone might face liquidation under the circumstances?
Sure. So the liquidation like scenario is pretty similar to any other situation where you lock collateral. I think like the collateralization ratio, the cutoff level is 125%. So if you go below 125%, one of the liquidation bots would liquidate you. And what is important to understand about UMA is that you lose everything if that happens. There's no liquidation like refund or anything. Now, to be clear, when I say you lose everything, you still have all that YUSD you minted and did something with it, right?
Sure.
Like you took out a loan and someone else repaid it for you. And the same is true with like Maker and a CDP, but it's important to understand that if that happens, unlike MakerDAO, which has kind of like, you know, in most situations has a refund for a liquidation if there's any excess collateral. Now, what's nice though is like our cutoff is 125%, so it's less than the MakerDAO 150%.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm very like intimate with the MakerDAO system, so comparing it there is just like my go-to. I don't know if it's like
super helpful actually. I mean,
okay,
lots of people are familiar with MakerDAO and the kind of primitive. So you know that it's such a ubiquitous fixture in the DeFi space. So
yeah, and absolutely. it feels important because this system is like similar enough that people might just overlay their understanding of MakerDAO onto it, and so it's important to have people understand where the differences lie as well.
It's interesting though, right? Because if you kind of zoom back on UMA, like UMA is sort of a meta platform, right? Because it's more than, you know, because I think what when you're talking about assets, you know, you're talking about the ability to generate synthetic assets, you know, and deploy, right? At the moment, I guess, is it an open platform, or is it more that like UMA, you know, the UMA core devs are the ones to launch, you know, synthetic assets?
Yeah, awesome question. It is very much an open platform, and anyone can come and suggest like a price ID. So let me just back up one step.
Yeah.
For any synthetic asset that wants to be launched, we have to the community has to approve that price ID. And so like the reason for that is in order for us to actually report the price in the event of a dispute, we need to have a shared understanding of how we're going to interpret that price, including like where are we going to look for it. Like we need an understanding of that. So in order to get approved, the community has to review that standardization, and there has to be like kind of enough of a market to justify saying that this thing has a price. Like it would be difficult to decide something has a price if it's like, you know, an NFT or like a house, you know, like that would be difficult potentially, or something that doesn't have like a market.
Is that approval gated through sort of the tokenized governance? Like, is that how the community does it?
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially the token holders are incentivized to increase the amount of value that's locked on the system. So any token holder would want like a synthetic asset that's going to get a wide adoption. They would want that. And so, and to answer your question is yes. I mean, the proposals we discuss inside the community, we talk about, you know, how useful it would be, what the potential risks would be, the security concerns, how difficult is it to get these price feeds. So we talk about those things, and then we finalize on GitHub, and then we vote. We do an on-chain vote to approve like a particular price ID. Yeah.
Does a new price ID require kind of a new kind of contract audit process, or how do you kind of it doesn't work that way?
Yeah, no, it doesn't require a contract, like a new contract. The contracts themselves are have all been audited, of course, and every change is audited by Open Zeppelin. But actually deploying like a particular price ID is more like a new parameter than it is anything like that. Like there's like a template, I think is the right language for
Makes
that, a
sense. Makes
financial
sense.
template. Yeah.
So the idea would be that you would essentially look for some kind of source of pricing information, and then you would kind of try to ensure that there's security around that, and then.
Yes. And what's cool about this, so like let me just give you an example of like ETH BTC. We say, okay, where is this high volume and what are trustworthy sources, right? So we might choose, I forget the specific, but I think it might have been like Binance, Coinbase, and maybe Poloniex or something.
Yeah, this is super
And
helpful.
and what we choose is the median price. So in the event of this timestamp, an event of a price request, we take that timestamp and we call each of these price feeds and we say, okay, what was the price during this time? We take the median price. So if there's an outlier, it would be booted out for that reason. But then we also like these are humans who are having a discussion. So like we check it, but let's imagine there was a scenario where one exchange the price was way different, or imagine a scenario where there was like I don't know, somebody was able to like manipulate the prices on all three exchanges.
Yes.
Not very likely with like Ethereum, right? That wouldn't be profitable to do probably. But we have this kind of caveat in there, which is like, this is the process that UMA holders should use when they're analyzing a price request, but they should also like refer to broad market consensus. So if there was something weird happening, we would have a conversation about it. And UMA holders are incentivized to basically like be smart, like provide reasonable answers here so that people want to use UMA.
This is a
Um,
very, what I really like about what you're reflecting on is I would say it's kind of a refreshing philosophy with respect to kind of pure decentralization. It feels like I think there are kind of code is law hardliners that kind of exist in the community. And, I think I'd like to kind of honor them since some of them represent like tremendous contributors. But I think on the flip side, like, it feels like you're really talking about a financial system, right? And you're talking about kind of ensuring that there are proper incentives within that system for good acting.
yes, absolutely. And what's also cool about it is like when I first heard about the system, I wasn't so sure. It's like, oh, people are going to be like voting on what the price of something was. It just sounded weird to me at first. But now that I'm in it, one important like thing to note as well is like the system is designed that it will never be used. Like there should never be an economic incentive to ever use it. Now that doesn't mean it's never been challenged. We had a price dispute last week actually, but essentially it's
That's
never
fascinating.
profitable to be wrong. It's never profitable to be wrong. Like, and neither was that profitable. The person who filed the dispute, liquidation dispute, invalidly, like lost money, and they were wrong. Like the
They lost
position they
money
tried
on
to liquidate.
liquidation and then they lost money again on dispute.
Well, so they were the one. Someone else liquidated a position. No, I'm sorry. Someone tried to liquidate a position they shouldn't have.
Ah,
And then one of the dispute bots came in and said like, hey, wait a minute, you don't get to do this because the price isn't where it should be. Uh, and then as a community, we all looked at what the price was and we confirmed that, we just, and so actually we don't say, yes, you were wrong or no, you were right. All we do is we say, this was the price at this timestamp. That's it. And then the protocol, you know, goes from there that they handle whether the adjudication goes to the liquidator or the disputer.
that's really neat. That's neat. So it's almost like a kind of a Schrodinger's equation type of, Schrodinger's cat, right? Like it's sort of, is the cat alive or is it dead? Like it's
Right.
uncollapsed waveform. Like, we have to go look inside the box.
Right. Yeah, I like that. So yeah, the system is what's cool is like for instance, we did YComp and that never received that the price of YComp never went on chain. Like we launched this synthetic asset and never once did the protocol have to know what the price of it was until expiry. Like when it expires, and we haven't talked about this yet, but currently all UMA synthetic assets expire. So when it expires, we call the UMA holders the DVM or the data verification mechanism. We call that and get the price out during expiry. But I just think it's really cool. Like from day one till the very end, the price never had to come on chain, and everything worked, and nobody complained. And there were liquidations, but they were like accurate. The position was under collateralized, and they got liquidated.
Yeah, that's cool. And obviously, automated liquidation is a tremendous feature rather than a bug. It's absolutely one of the things that ensures, I think, over collateralization, I think transparency, and I think automated liquidation kind of really ensure kind of overall system stability, like across multiple protocols. So I think it's, and obviously cascading is a concern, right? The idea that there are these very interlocking systems, because one of the things that's evolved in this crazy mess are kind of the Instadap types, which kind of enable kind of yield chaining, where you can kind of like do these really complex the gas prices get pretty ridiculous, but you can do these kind of multi-contract transactions and complex transactions that do all kinds of crazy manipulations.
Right. Yeah. Composability has added like this, the layer of potential cascading failures and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I think that's the overarching concern is kind of like this, this kind of system deadlock, like this kind of whole freezing up of wholesale freeze up. But I think, one of the things that's nice to see is kind of collateralization rates, and to see things that are just on-chain data. Like you can kind of really see, and I think one of the things that I think makes people nervous, like I don't know if you have a take on this at all, is kind of multiply locked contract value, right? Because the thing that locked value may or may not be locked value, right? So if you look at TVL, like TVL is not always TVL, right? And right. Something can be locked one place, and the same thing can be also locked a different place. So how do you feel about all that?
So I remember when the TVL number was climbing this last month or the month before, and I was convinced it was because they were like double reporting. So like with Compound, of course, when people started yield farming, they were just winding up their stable coins, and so the Compound was reporting the number of DAI that were locked was like far exceeded the max supply of DAI that exists in the world, right?
That's hard to do.
So that was awkward. And then, and actually I thought that DeFi Pulse had been reporting it as the total, but actually they weren't. They were actually not allowing the rehypothecated DAI to be counted towards that TVL. But I'm sure it's happening. And like, I actually don't really have a sense of like where that value is being like improperly double counted. From a financial risk perspective, like I do it. I just sort of analyze, where it makes sense or what feels comfortable to me. But like, I mean, I guess it just comes down to like making sure you really understand the liquidation ratios, et cetera. So when DAI sort of depegged a bit and was trading high at $1.03, $1.04, I was actually doing that on Compound before. I was yield farming before it was cool.
Nice.
But it wasn't yield farming. I was just like shorting DAI. I was using Compound to short DAI because I thought it was going to go down where it should be. And I did a lot of research into like, when would Compound liquidate me? If DAI like climbed up in price, would Compound liquidate me, for example? So you have to like consider these margins and the likelihood of an asset price movement and whatnot. It is a little bit weird if someone's going like straight to Instadap and doing that, and maybe they don't, maybe they haven't done that analysis. It's hard work. I mean, it's like, it could be a full-time, yield farming could be a full-time job.
I think I'd like to go to LinkedIn and just type in yield farmer and look to see how many people show up with that as their job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's an interesting little development. I'm kind of curious, even Miko, if you don't mind me bouncing a question to you.
Yeah, please.
Like, do you think that yield farming is like a value add, or is it a trend? And do you think that we're going to see it carrying on for the weeks and months or even years?
So I see it as so the metaphor I've been using is it really is like farming. And if you think about what happens in farming, is that farming is largely benefiting from decomposers, right? So like bacteria in the soil,
Okay.
right? And basically what happens is that what farmers do is they till the soil, right? So tilling is the process of like turning it over, right? And essentially allowing the bacteria in the soil to basically digest and consume kind of like raw roughage and like plant matter, and so it's decomposition, right? That's this kind of process, right? And so for me, like the thing that it does that's so crazy is it in some ways favors innovators, right? In the sense that if you have a small token, farming the small token is favored over farming a large token, right? Just because of the net increase in token value, right? So my thought experiment on this is something I call the DOMP token, which is basically what you do is you just take we're already seeing this, right? These Chinese farmers created the Wi-Fi I. I don't know if you saw that, right? But it's YFII, right? Which is it's a pure-blooded clone of Wi-Fi token, right? And the thing that's hilarious is if I make my imaginary DOMP token, right, and I start with a token price of the market cap of like a penny, right? Like I should get all the comp miners, like they should all the farmers should come to me because if they collect my token, it'll increase in value faster, right? So I guess so I guess for me, like, is it a trend? Like the thing that is impossible is that it's an intrinsic network effect, right? So what I mean by is it a trend is it's kind of an unstoppable reality. It's almost like weaponized network effects, right? So because it's a kind of weaponized network effect, it's sort of part of an arms race, right? In other words, like you can't stop. There's no stop to it. There's no end to it, right? Like you can just design more and more and more and more leverage mechanisms that will kind of incentivize people. And the only thing it'll do is it'll continue to incentivize innovation. But the problem that's really interesting about my thought experiment about the DOMP token is that technically isn't innovation. Like it's like a flat clone, right? So, the point is like I haven't innovated a bit. And the thing that's kind of creepy is you actually see that in nature too. Like you see biological mimicry and you see evolution producing like essentially very, very similar organisms that are attacking very similar niches, and they're successful. Like it's like, is that all you do? Like you're just the same as that other thing, except you're slightly different. And it's like, yes, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
So I think to make a long story short, yeah, I think it's definitely weaponizing network effects, and it's an arms race that I think is incessant. But I think if we keep going this way, it's gonna become like a bioreactor. Like it's gonna be this constantly churning bacteria that's constantly decomposing, and anything that gets large is just gonna get like consumed, right? It's just gonna be like digested by this vat.
That's very interesting. And I like the idea of thinking of these as like organisms that are entering into like fitness tests to see which ones can survive and multiply.
Because they're just trying to grab energy, right? They're just trying to lock contract value, and so they're just hungry and they're just looking for and as you pointed out very aptly, like there's only a certain amount of dye in existence, right? So you kind of have to get the dye from someone, right? Because there's just not an infinite amount of dye just sitting around, right? It's all, most of it's doing stuff. So, you gotta eat, right? You gotta compete and eat.
Yes. So you mentioned this idea around like this 1 penny market cap, and like I guess I would push back to ask you, like, wouldn't yield farming be difficult to do if the underlying token didn't have some meme of value, even though it seems so the meme
Governance
of value
token.
seems, right? So exactly that is a meme of value, but like you also need to be claiming to govern a thing, right? You need a product that you're governing for people. No, is that too optimistic?
This conversation is so funny. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like we're alluding to why Andre Cronje quit in a huff, because of the kind of toxicity potential, right? Like they're definitely, and I feel like this, right? Like I know that there's so many legitimate actors and great projects in the space, but like if you look at the buyers, right, like how many of the buyers of the Wi-Fi token are like, I can't wait to use these to vote on like improvement proposals. Like it's like I'm gonna pay $5,000 so that I can vote on these improvement proposals. It's like I'm thinking that's not your concept.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. And actually, if you don't mind me swinging this back around, like I have some kind of responses in the context of UMA's liquidity mining and
Yeah,
governance,
please. Of course. Of
if you don't
course.
mind.
No, not at
Um,
all.
so like we've been very cautious. Like so the liquidity mining we're doing right now, we call it a pilot, and really the intention is to do it in a fairly like clean way with low impermanent loss on the pool, just to see like how much does it cost to attract capital. Like how many dollars of UMA tokens do we have to pay to attract capital to be liquidity providers?
Great.
But the goal is very much like, yeah, to be calculated, to be small, to be intentional, and to collect information and then to iterate. Um, the the other piece with like the governance token with UMA is the way it's designed is if you're holding the token and you're not voting, you're actually sort of implicitly losing value because every time there's a vote, the total token supply is increased by 0.05%.
Inflation.
Yeah, and distributed to voters,
I dig it.
to people who vote successfully. And so, just from a pure like market cap and dilution model,
Yeah. Great
what you're doing is transferring value from people who don't vote to people who do vote.
That's so cool. We should do that for like democratic societies and countries.
Yeah, right. You transfer a little bit of your rights, or at least your.
Well, if you don't vote, like that's
Yeah.
there should be some weird like minor penalty somewhere.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, like UMA is kind of a funny like the culture and the way that we and they take steps is like pretty like intentional and gradual and scientific. And that's also why our community tends to be pretty like not full of when Lambo chat, and it is like people really seem to enjoy like nerding out. Like our community is full of nerds, and I'm nerd farming really in that community.
Great.
That's my goal.
That's very admirable. Can you tell me a bit about? Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm curious about kind of your like the founders, and tell me a little bit about kind of what background kind of caused them to sort of move in this area and what's that about?
So this is going to be hearsay, and maybe we're far enough into this interview that they won't have listened this far. So Hart and Allison both work together at Goldman Sachs in New York. So they have like a tremendous amount of the traditional finance background.
Yep.
I know that Allison worked a lot with like interest rate swaps and, like some of the things that she shared with me around that were just like, it was just like a very like intense, but like narrowly specific job. So like she was very much in her own world working on these very specific problems. Now I know that, and then Hart, like maybe I have less specifics about in that regard, like what he was working on there. But I know kind of what drove them to come about with UMA, and UMA stands for Universal Market Access. I mean, it's the goal with this is not just to build, yield dollars for crypto traders. It's really to allow anyone who can access Ethereum to also gain exposure to risk on any market in the world. Now that's not going to happen tomorrow, but that's kind of the goal, and that's the ethos that brings them to doing this project. Yeah, I know that's. Yeah.
I
Does that answer your question?
I think UMA is also Tibetan Buddhist deity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the reason why I think that, and I could be wrong, so it's possible that I'm misremembering. But Robert Thurman, who's Uma Thurman's dad, is probably one of the premier Western scholars of Tibetan Buddhism, and
really?
so he named Uma Thurman after, I think, this Tibetan goddess. So Uma has an auspicious sort of divinity name, as well as being kind of a cool acronym.
Yes, yeah, I like it. It fits into the word human. It's just a fun name. I'm happy with it. And then the Uma Thurman has definitely made it into some Uma memes.
I think there's definitely you probably since you don't have Lambo people, you probably don't have like a meme sub channel on your like Discord.
There's a bit, yeah. I mean, there's a bit of that goes on, and I enjoy it. Like, we love it. I mean, definitely.
Yeah, of course. You're building and
Yeah.
exporting culture. One of the things
Oh,
I
yeah.
really admire about Wi-Fi is how Andre kind of is like a one-man culture. Like
Uh,
it's so I would call it a cult, but it's really a culture. Like the
mhm.
governance token has zero value. Like it's just like these amazing like moments in DeFi, right? Like he's really
Yeah,
creating history with these,
it is.
yeah, right?
Wow.
It's absolutely pioneering. This I'm testing in production. Don't lock value into this contract. Like who says that? That's amazing. Yeah, it's a gorgeous thing. It's really amazing. It's very
Yes.
next level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And then
pretty
and then
wild
and
stuff.
then that's what they do, right? And then the
Right.
next thing, then everyone's off to the races amazingly.
Yeah, it's funny when there's been times we put contracts on or like launch a new synthetic asset, but we haven't announced it yet, so people don't even have a context or know what it is. And there's like people trading on Uniswap right away, or like sending interactions at the contract right away, And
They
yeah,
just
it's
want to
pretty
talk to
funny.
it. They just want to be like,
Yeah, what
what
are
are you
you?
gonna do? What if I
Yeah,
put this
exactly.
stuff in here? That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so dynamic. I mean, I think that's one of the amazing things. I like to think also of all of this kind of activity, principally kind of debt oriented activity around Ethereum, as almost being like the spiral arms of the Milky Way. Like it's sort of the gravitational rotation of
Hmm.
Ethereum, right? In the sense that it's creating a primary velocity of money, right? And all of the kind of biodiversity within this sphere creates kind of this really interesting Keynesian accelerator effect, right? So when you start to see all of this diversity, it becomes kind of this endlessly fascinating kind of game. It's like a fractal game that kind of has infinite sort of it's sort of a maze of twisty passages all alike. So I think it's
Hmm.
so I think we're in for like a really interesting time. I think in cryptographic asset space, thanks to
Yes.
protocols like yours.
Right. It is cool. And Miko, the first time we met was in Bangkok when you gave a talk at a conference, and that was pretty much like in the bear as it gets bear market. And I think it was it wasn't pre DeFi, but it was it was definitely pre like wide acknowledgement of DeFi.
Yeah.
I remember going to a conference after that one where we met, and I wrote on my name tag like, my name is Clayton. Ask me about DeFi. And like most people, I don't think anyone had heard of it at that point. This was in Korea,
Yeah.
um, and now it's definitely the big topic, right? Um, and yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Well,
It's
that
very
is
exciting stuff.
fantastic. I remember those times, and I think that I saw a really good Twitter meme today where it was kind of describing sort of these sort of Bitcoin fair weather friends that kind of are
Hmm.
like talking about easy money, and then showing all of these different seasons where you're getting rained on, or like like just all these different phases of Bitcoin where you're kind of sitting at the bottom of crypto winter, like just kind of desperately hanging on to your coins, so like
Right.
in a way, like I'm not gonna kind of put any moral tale around this whole thing, but I do think that like um the market is highly imperfect. It's highly volatile. It's able to stay irrational longer than people are able to stay solvent.
Mm.
But at some level, it seems to also finds a level, right? It's a bit like water finding its level. Like I feel like things like assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the market structure that DeFi provides, this kind of fractal market structure that it provides, like it's just fascinating watching this engine. And I think
Yes.
right now one of the things that's exploded onto the scene is kind of a war between the Ethereum maximalists and the Bitcoin maximalists. And in a way, I'm sympathetic, and the reason why I'm sympathetic is that there are days when you see both Bitcoin and Ether going up, right? But there are also days when you see kind of Ether going up and Bitcoin going down, and then you see days when Bitcoin, Ether going down, but altcoins that are on Ether are going up, right? And so
Right.
what you're seeing is this kind of really pumping action, right? You're seeing kind of like the trunk of the tree and then the branches, and you're seeing the leaves,
Right.
and you're just seeing this very kind of fractal, movement of energy, right? In a way,
Sure.
if you're a Bitcoin maximalist, you're basically thinking that those guys are stealing your energy, right? You're basically
Sure.
like, people are putting money into Bitcoin to stay in Bitcoin. It makes them mad that it's not doing that.
Right. And like, I don't know if this is a controversial comment, but to me, like, Bitcoin is going up because DeFi right now, because DeFi is bringing attention to crypto.
Well, and I think it's more than attention too. Like, I think that it is like a tree. And, I'm very much in the mood of like, Vitalik was an author for Bitcoin magazine, right? So like, it's not like Vitalik doesn't acknowledge and honor and recognize, like, like to me, Satoshi built Bitcoin to fork, and like, everything that's after that is essentially like, it's not literally a fork, but like, it's all Bitcoin. I mean,
Totally.
I realize I'm being a little bit controversial by saying something like that.
Sure.
I think the purists would get really mad, right? Because I think that they would be like, are you saying that Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin? Are you saying that Bitcoin SV is Bitcoin?
Sure.
And like, at that point, I'll probably be like stabbed and dragged into the street. But like, I don't,
homicide.
But I feel like Satoshi designed the thing to do what it's doing. Like it's not like he was like, oh, forking, what a novel mechanism. It's like, no, like, that's intrinsic to the governance model. So like,
sure,
so I think that's kind of where we're at. So yeah, I like it, and it's a great weather report.
You mentioned about markets being irrational, and like, I kind of go back and forth between this, right? Like, there's just a chance we have the wrong theories of rationality, right? if we persistently call the market irrational, perhaps we just have the wrong definition.
I love this. This is really amusing me.
And so something that Chris Berniski said in one of his talks, and he's actually, he's one of my like intellectual heroes in the space. But basically he said, like, once we have good models for crypto valuation, like, the prices will stop behaving so wildly. Which I think sort of makes sense. Like, that's sort of a new idea to me, but the idea is that, like, if we can actually analyze, like, how do we know how much a protocol is worth? If we have like a standardized and a somewhat accepted model for that, the market will start to like orbit around that, right? Like the prices will get tighter and tighter closest to those things. But we don't have that yet, right? And I just think it's super exciting that we're living in a time where we have these assets that like nobody knows how to value them, and there's definitely a reflexivity. So like, one person starts valuing it, so other people start valuing it because they're valuing it, and and it's just this cycle, and it's, I used to call that a Ponzi scheme, because it's just like, well, someone's putting money in because someone else is putting money in.
It's what Warren Buffett calls rat poison.
Okay, yeah. So the idea being that like the only reason it's going up is because other people are going up, blah, 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 blah. But after many iterations and watching this happen, and also watching sort of this Ponzi scheme activity actually result in market caps that stay, like protocols get built and then they maintain their value.
That's right.
Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem as simple as that. Well, there's something going on. There's some emergence.
If you look at the .com boom and bust, which I'm old enough to have survived, and was actually like even an adult through that time, young adult. The thing that is so clear is that was an insane bubble, right? Mm-hmm. But what happened was like a very fundamental investment in infrastructure that would have never happened. Like, we would never have invested so deeply in infrastructure, and the resulting companies represent like a major portion of the market capitalization of like all public companies, right? So if you look at these kind of so-called tech giants, and obviously, like, yes, like, they're shitty things that are happening with big tech companies, and nobody's happy, but like, what I'm saying though is that like these are kind of new institutions, and that these kinds of like bubbles and waves are really part of that creation process. So I do think that it is about investment, and to me the shining beauty of all of this is that open source software is going to win, because you can't fight it. You can't fight open source software. Oh no, I'd rather build my own proprietary software that does the same thing. Like, who does that? Like, losers. Like, like, you cannot fight free software. Like, it's free. Take it, use it, benefit from it, lower the cost of infrastructure, pass the value on to the user. Like, just go, right? Like, and
Yep.
and and the thing that's beautiful about what's happening in DeFi is exactly what we were describing before. It's just the incentives to innovate and to really just churn in this incubator, bioreactor of like hot innovation, and that's neat. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because the financial system, that your co-founders came out of is crazily slow at innovation at this juncture by this time.
Yep.
There's time for here comes the new thing.
And it's also like, of course, wedded to the existing power systems and the whole like KYC and just generally like exclusionary practices, right? Like I didn't mention, but I'm connecting to this call from the Philippines where I've been staying for the last half a year. And, I'm like living with people who make $5 a day and are not connected to the financial system by any means and don't have these opportunities. And like, I hope that DeFi keeps coming back to that ethos as well. It's innovation, but I hope, so here's what I hope, Miko, isn't just like that we care about it as humans.
Yeah.
I hope that we've actually discovered something that's fundamentally different and like results in a more equitable distribution of value across the world just by virtue of its design, like in almost that falls out of the code, not just because we're like trying to make ourselves be altruistic, but that there's actually something essential about it. I hope that that's the truth.
Well, so and this is a beautiful note to kind of wrap up, right? Which is you're talking about universal market access, UMA, right? You're talking about universality and you're talking about this kind of potential social benefit. Obviously, people could, reach through the screen and like slap my face and say like, you're a privileged tech brat and you should stop talking about stuff you don't know anything about. But to me, the mood around the idea of inclusion and the idea of open source is the idea of lowering the cost of infrastructure. And by lowering the cost of infrastructure, not only do we increase the rate of innovation, but you also create opportunities to serve, populations that are currently underserved, and I think it's just because it's cheaper. Like that's all that's happening, right? So if you just make it cheaper, then you can serve more people the same thing with and charge them less, right? So so it's really commoditization. That's what open source is. And so like, let's just commoditize all this stuff and give as much of it away for free as we possibly can to as many people as we possibly can and see what happens, right? I think that's the game here.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Wonderful.
Good stuff.
Yeah, great chatting. So great to see you, and welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Miko. Cheers.
Okay, take care.